Now, let us talk about a problem in our society, one of the biggest problems in our society, which is, of course, a newspaper called The Guardian. It was started by a man, apparently, who had a load of links to slavery. They did their own investigation into their own situation and discovered that not only did lots of places in the north of England have links to slavery, particularly the cotton industry back in the 19th and 18th century, but so too did The Guardian. So they sort of did a big mea culpa and talked about how they were going to set up some kind of contrition bank. They were going to start paying some reparations to people. They were going to start sponsoring businesses in the Caribbean in order to make way for their hatred of all things to do with slavery, because they, of course, were just as bad as everybody else. But it's worse than that, because unfortunately The Guardian is involved in yet another race storm for the second week in a row. It was only a week ago yesterday that they published a letter by Diane Abbott from the Labour Party, who had written a letter basically in response to an article that had been written the week before. And she was basically saying and making out that you couldn't suffer racism unless you were black. Specifically, if you were Jewish, you absolutely couldn't. And in fact, being Jewish was not much worse than being a redhead, which was effectively what she said. She appeared on Plank of the Week for that. In fact, she won it. So if you want to go and watch that, you can. It wouldn't be surprising to you to hear that. But here's the thing. Not only did they publish the anti-Semitic rant, but they actually were so used to the views that were expressed in that rant that they didn't even think that it was a news story. Not one of the editors at The Observer looked at that and thought, this is a good story. Maybe we should put it on page one. Diane Abbott appears to be calling Jewish people akin to just being red-headed and not really facing very much anti-Semitism or indeed racism. Incredible, right? Now, Catherine Viner is the boss of The Guardian. The Observer is the sort of Guardian on a Sunday. They call it a slightly different name, but it has exactly the same values. The Guardian, once again, though, recovered from that particular scandal by starting another one. Because you would have listened to our show on Friday and seen that Richard Sharp, the man who was alleged to have organised a loan or helped to organise a loan for Boris Johnson when he was Prime Minister shortly before he was made chairman of the BBC, was forced out. He resigned from his job as chairman of the BBC on the basis of there being a conflict of interest, which he should have spotted a bit earlier. We covered that story in every single way possible. We covered it from the point of view of the BBC licence fee. We covered it from the point of view of the fact that basically he should have gone probably some weeks or maybe months earlier. He'd been in the job a couple of years. We also covered it from the point of view of the BBC not really being run very well. What we didn't do was what The Guardian did to cover it from the point of view of the fact that Richard Sharp is Jewish. They drew a cartoon which was anti-Semitic, was said to be anti-Semitic as soon as it was published, and which they eventually decided to admit was anti-Semitic. It was written by a guy called Martin Rosen, who is The Guardian's cartoonist. If you see, if you're watching us now, you'll see a cartoon that he's drawn today, or somebody's drawn today, of Prince Charles. Right? You might remember famously The Guardian also did a really, really dreadful, horrible, sexist and racist cartoon of Priti Patel, in which they sort of portrayed her as a cow with a ring through her nose. You might remember that. Under any other circumstance, that would be regarded as racist, right? Now, according to a piece in the paper today written by somebody called Dave Rich, who's head of policy at the Community Security Trust and author of a book called The Left's Jewish Problem, they've allowed him to write a piece in which he says that he doesn't believe The Guardian or the cartoonist Rosen are particularly anti-Jewish. Well, the evidence might suggest otherwise. People on the left have been defending The Guardian and basically saying, oh, yes, you know, of course, this is not an anti-Semitic trope. Well, the way that Richard Sharp is portrayed is such a terrible, awful image that I'm not going to show you it, because I don't think we should. But it's basically, if you can remember all of those really awful anti-Jewish sort of cartoons that were drawn, showing Jewish people counting money, looking very sort of, you know, piggish with large noses, all of that kind of thing. You know, it's a typical trope, but everybody knows what it is and everybody knows what's going on. Only The Guardian seems to think it's OK. But why on earth is Catherine Viner still in a job, would be my question. Because the Board of Deputies, the Jewish organisation, is calling for her to meet with them because they think that she should resign. You know? Absolutely unbelievable what's going on in The Guardian. There's only one thing for it, I'm afraid. It is The Guardian. It does get torn up on a fairly regular basis on this show. I think today, more than any, that's what it should be.